and welcome to ANC Decides, the show that gives you up-to-the-minute reports, commentary and analysis building up to the December elective conference. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabalani. Let's start off with our headlines. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma gets Zulu King's blessing ahead of the ANC National Conference. King Zwelithini wishes Dlamini Zuma well in the presidential race. ANC marks centenary over Oliver Regional Tambo. The longest-serving ANC leader would have turned 100 years old today had he lived to this day. The ANC and its alliance partners admit strained relations but resolves to make amends. The Alliance Political Council will meet again in November 2017. And on to the main story for today. The land question continues to dominate the national discourse. The issue is becoming even more pressing as the ANC heads to the national conference in December.
The land issue remains a motive 104 years after the Unjust Land Act of 1913. It also remains the elephant in the room for the 105-year-old ANC.
If we move around, those who own big farms in Membe, those that have been, benefited from the previous apartheid government. So our people are just moving in, but slowly. So they are still in control of the economy, and that need to be changed.
Whoever gets the land question right among the presidential candidates is likely to be head and shoulders above the rest in the hotly contested race.
Mr. Ramaphosa is pushing so much, talking so much about clean government, is focusing on that. While Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is talking about the radical transformation now or never. Maybe it means that she's focusing it more. She's focusing on the land more.
While land expropriation without compensation gets some hopeful, it gets others digging in their heels. Ultimately, the devil is in the detail of implementation.
The land issue is a constitutional matter. So in terms of whether it is feasible to expropriate land without compensation, I believe that the ANC have got a position on that. When you look at the NGC for 2015, it was very clear that the Section 25 of the Constitution should be applicable if you want to expropriate the land.
In the end, the unjust status quo cannot remain, where the majority remains landless while the minority holds on to vast tracts of land which are hardly in good use.
We have noticed that as it stands, those who are really having the land in their possession now, seemingly they've dragged their leg. They were not really prepared to release the land.
There is some land that is lying idly in the lands of white people who are not using it. What the ruling party should do in the conference is to propose for the audit of all unused land and see what can be done, because when you expropriate without compensation, there is a problem when it comes to people who are using it productively. So that cannot be done just like that. They must consider the land that is not being used.
The ANC is at a crossroads on the burning land issue. Only resolutions taken at the December conference will determine if the country will cross the Rubicon once and for all. Bureau Report, ANN 7.
And now today in studio, we're joined by Black First Land First Deputy President Zanele Luana, as well as AfriForum's Arends Roots panel. Welcome to the both of you.
Thank you very much.
Now the land issue. Now firstly, there's one legal head who puts it so succinctly. He says that in South Africa, the dispossession of land from black people by white people is the original sin, colonial sin of colonial conquest. And beyond this, that this very sin and its consequences still loom large in present-day South Africa. I'd like to believe that all of us cannot perhaps dispute that fact. But Arends, what is your position, though, on land restitution?
Well, thank you, and thank you for the way in which you framed the question. Our position, in short, is that we need to differentiate between land restitution and land redistribution, because the two are not the same. where there were cases, we know there were cases of dispossession, and restitution needs to happen there. In other words, where there was a case of a person who lived, or a community who lived on a piece of land, and that land was taken from them, then that land must be given back. But redistribution is not the same thing. Redistribution is to say, if you are white and you own land, you're not supposed to own that land. We do know, we don't subscribe, AfriForum, as AfriForum, we don't subscribe to this empty land theory, that South Africa was just empty when the voortrekkers came here. We don't believe that, but we also believe, or we know, that there were big parts of South Africa that wasn't occupied, and we know that the history of land ownership is much more complex. There were various treaties and purchases of land among, for example, the voortrekkers and the Zulu people and so forth. But the way in which the land issue is being dealt with today is just in broad strokes to say, oh, if you're white and you steal land, then you're a criminal. And that's just factually not true.
But can we acknowledge, perhaps, to say that how some got land or how black people were dispossessed is either through the barrel of the gun, trickery, and sometimes in apartheid South Africa, it was through laws that were conceived to further dispossess them. Would you say that amongst the many that you speak of, that other people came to own land, is the barrel of the gun, trickery, and these laws that were created?
Yes. If the question is, did that happen in South Africa? Yes, I would say the answer is yes. But we also know that it's not simply a case of every white person who owns land acquired that land through the barrel of the gun. We do know that happened in some cases, and that's why there's a land restitution process. And that's why I said, if it can be shown that a community owned a piece of land, then that land must be given back. But simply making broad strokes and say, oh, white people shouldn't own land, we're going to take it and give it to black people, that borders on a crime against humanity, because you're categorizing people according to their skin color and treating them according to that.
All right. And Zanele, your take on all of this, your position on land restitution as Black First, Land First?
I think where we should begin is that South Africa, first and foremost, is a country that belongs to black people. White people who own land in South Africa today are all beneficiaries of land theft, a crime against humanity that was committed on our black ancestors.
Okay.
This is a black country.
This is the position of black, apologies there.
All of us.
Okay. So I don't know if I'm getting you correctly. You're saying the position of Black First, Land First is that South Africa is a land that belongs to black people and not everybody, as in it's a land that belongs to all who live in it, black and white, all races that being, and sexes as well.
This whole country as a whole belongs to black people. White people who are here today, who own at least 80% of the land.
It's not true.
They got that land through violence, through black genocide, through colonialism, through the enslavement of our people, through converting us to slaves. We are tenants today in the land of our forefathers, in the land that belongs to us. So South Africa, all of it, belongs to black people.
And then
White
the position of the governing party, though, the ANC.
Unwanted visitors, because they came into the country and the only language they could understand is the language of violence. The language in which they continue to organize themselves in all the farms and game reserves and mining communities that are still dominated by white people. So land
So are you
expropriation is very
distancing yourself?
important.
So you would say you're distancing yourself from the Constitution, because at least the governing party, the ANC, subscribes to this Constitution and says that the land belongs to all who live in it, black and white.
Society has reached consensus. There is full consensus that the Constitution we have today does not work to serve the interest of black people in this country, because it's the same Constitution that guarantees property rights and ownership to a group of white settler minority that owns land today that was taken away from black people. So the conversation on land expropriation without compensation is very important, because it speaks to looking into historical injustices and how we should solve them as black people. If you go all over the world, in Europe, there are no conquered people there. But they had the gut to leave Europe, to leave Holland, to leave the Americas and conquer us as black people in our own land. So we should be united as black people. We must fight. We must reject racist organizations such as AfriForum. In fact, it's Euroforum.
Let's rope you in as well.
And they represent a settler minority.
Your take, you are said to be the ones who are tenants here. In fact, you are the settlers that have come here, you've stolen the land, and the land belongs to black people. Your take on that?
Well, firstly, there's a microphone just there, so you don't need to scream. It picks up the audio quite well.
We are not going to
let's not go there. Okay. We need to advance arguments here. We need superior logic. We won't go there.
Well, let's try to respond with logic. So she's talking about South Africa belonging to black people, and then she's referencing Europe. So I'm quite curious, perhaps you can answer me if it's a position of black first, land first, that Europe belongs to white people, and that white people in Europe would have a right to say black people aren't welcome because they were historically there. So if you apply your argument consistently, that would be you would have to say that Europe belongs to white people. But no, I'd like, when you speak about consensus, there was a poll done recently in South Africa in which people were asked, what could be done to improve your life? And the amount of people who responded by saying more land reform would improve my life was 1%. So if we're talking about consensus, there's broad consensus that land reform, at least the way it's being implemented now, is not improving people's lives. There's a 1% group who says that, which is about the same size as the support that Black First, Land First has. The point is that history is much more complex than that. There were cases of land dispossession by white people and by black people. And if we apply this logic that you are using now, then your position should also be that the Khoisan should chase the black people into the sea, because the Khoisan were here first. But it's very convenient for you to draw back to history only up to a certain point.
I wanted to touch on the Khoi because they were the first to be dispossessed, which is something that I wanted to perhaps also get a response from you to say, do you also represent the Khoi? Because they were stripped of their dignity. That when we speak of this sin of dispossession, of colonial conquest, they were the first to be dispossessed. So do you ever speak of restoring the dignity of the Khoisan people?
Let's make this very clear. The Khoisan people are black people. They were oppressed, they were enslaved, they were almost exterminated by a white settler minority in this country, first and foremost because they are black. So when we speak about the return of land to black people, that definitely includes the Khoisan people.
Can you
there
define
are also historical evidence that black people, including the Khoisans, were living in harmony as a people in South Africa. The problem arises when a white settler community that has an agenda of imperialism until today decided
how do we solve this problem?
Perpetuate racism in this country.
Now, Errants, how do we solve this problem? Because we all must acknowledge as we sit here that black people were disenfranchised. They lost their land. They do not have land today. They want to take out loans. It's difficult for black people in South Africa. You go to Alexandra, they're living in utter squalor. And you've got some white people that have enough land to be sharing with others. And there are those that are saying we've got to be willing to give a little. Because if you watch people or somehow breed this group of poor people, it will eventually come to your backyard. Because these very people will then at some point be the ones that are criminals, so we've got to give a little as South Africans completely. So what is the role of AfriForum in resolving this problem? Because we all need to meet each other halfway.
Okay, thank you. You said a lot, and I don't agree with everything, but I do agree. Let me firstly, once again, history is not that complex. When we're talking about land dispossession, for some reason we never talk about the Mfecane and the reign of Shaka Zulu and so forth, and that was also very important, an important part of history. But on the question, yes, black people are struggling in South Africa, of course. It would be very disingenuous and myopic to try to disagree with that. And part of the problem, and within the context of land reform, is that black people do not have access to proper schooling and proper education and proper training. And we find that it's research that's been done in South Africa, more than 80% of the schools in this country are dysfunctional, and it's mostly schools attended mostly by black people. And on the issue of land reform, government statistics say that more than 90% of these farms have failed, redistributed farms. You can talk about, I'm from Zanine, I grew up right next to Sapiko, where 2,000 people lost their jobs as a result of land reform. So what should be done is the emphasis should not be on redistribution and counting percentages and say so many white people, so many black people.
But they ask for them to be mentored on these farms, to say that if you have some sort of mentorship agreement where they are trained, because in essence, most of the time, black people are running the farms. Yes, maybe there may be the the owner of the farm happens to be white, but to a certain extent he trusts the people on the ground to run the farm. So shouldn't there be a mentorship program here that runs for a longer period, so that at some point there's a smooth takeover of this black community that then goes on to run the farm?
Yes and no. If the notion is simply black people must take over white people's land, no, I disagree with that, and we can talk about that. But on the mentorship issue, it does happen. It happens quite a lot. I've actually seen it in several places. But here's the irony, is when it's government enforced, it doesn't seem to be working. When you look at all the projects where government is involved, we don't see that it's working. We see the opposite happening. We see commercial farms turning into subsistence farming or into squatter camps. That's what's happening. But where it's an initiative that's driven by the community, we see that it works. And we know about the projects of ZZ2, the tomato farmers, and we know about a lot of things in Limpopo, for example, just to mention one, where people are doing it, where people are put through training programs and so forth, and eventually they become managers, they become farm managers. But that's the way to do it. It shouldn't be a government-enforced program, because according to the data available, whenever government becomes involved, it fails. It fails. So there needs to be a different approach, and it's bound to fail, because the policy is based, it's an output-based policy. In other words, the way to measure whether the policy is working or not is simply to count heads and to count the colors of people's skins and say, okay, we have so many whites, so many blacks, so many colored, so many Indians. Fine, we've succeeded. It should be an input-based policy. In other words, to say, let's emphasize training and skills development. We can see that in people enrolling to study agriculture. There are very few black people enrolling to study agriculture in comparison to white people, and there are very few people in general.
But in some farming communities, perhaps the Mpumalangas, you've got quite a lot of them that actually go on to enroll for agriculture specifically.
Yes.
Actually, we will be coming back to this conversation. I just want to take the poll results so that we can speak further on this and expand with just the results. Now, here are the results from this week's poll question. The question was, is land expropriation without compensation proposal feasible? Well, in Mpumalanga, 65% said yes to land expropriation without compensation. 35% said no. And then on to Limpopo. In Limpopo, 44% say yes to land expropriation without compensation and 56% say no. And then moving on to the Eastern Cape, it's 65% saying yes to expropriation without compensation and 35% saying no. In KwaZulu-Natal, we have 81% saying yes to land expropriation without compensation, while 19% say no. Moving on to the Free State, it's 66% for the yeses and 34% for the noes. In the Northwest, it's 92% saying yes and only 8% saying no. In Gauteng, 70% say yes, while 30% say no. Now, in total, it's 69% for the yeses and 31% for the noes. Errens, let's start with you. Your take on just that poll?
Well, I think you can do a lot with polls depending on how you frame the question. So if I go out and I ask people, here's a pen, I can either give it to you for free or you have to pay me 10 Rand to get this pen. Which do you prefer? The vast majority of people would say, I would rather have you give it to me for free than to pay for it. So
you're saying the question wasn't phrased correctly?
I think if you frame, I don't think that you should frame any question by asking people, do you want something for free? I think that's not that's not how an economy is supposed to work. I think the more important questions would be what's in the interest of the economy. And I'm not saying it's in the interest of the economy for whites to own land and not for blacks to own land. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying what policies are in the interest of the economy? Because we're talking here about taking, basically scrapping property rights and taking from one group and giving to another, which is what happened in Zimbabwe and Venezuela. Basically, if you take a list of the world's economies,
so you're saying it's not in the
let me just finish this sentence.
Okay, no problem.
The world's worst economies, if you take them from the bottom, North Korea, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, those are the countries that have been doing this. It's the exact opposite of economic freedom.
So you're saying that the status quo should remain to better the economy, or for us to say we've got to weigh things, that if we then decide to dispossess now white South Africa, then we could somehow shake the economy or destabilize it.
No. Let me phrase it differently. I don't think dispossession should be an issue at all. I don't think saying, oh, we're going to take from you and give to someone else. You know, it's ironic. all the farmland in South Africa in total is valued, I think it's around 7 billion rand. The amount of money that the South African government has spent on land reform is somewhere like 80 billion rand. If they just spent all that money on buying these farms, they would have bought everything already. So instead, they spend it on all these government programs where they waste all this money and there's corruption involved and people get rich. The point is that there should be a market-based approach. If you throw out the market, you're going to crash the economy. And then everyone's going to be poor. And then we're going to have a nice Gini coefficient. There's going to be no inequality because no one's going to have anything.
Zanele, your take on just the poll?
The results are very promising. And our people who are living in unimaginable conditions of poverty and land dispossession, they definitely want land. But us as black people, we're not going to be lectured by land thieves on the issue of land. As I have said before, all of South Africa belongs to black people. As Black First Land First, currently now, all over the country, we are setting up land expropriation committees. We are going to take back the land and we are going to defend this country.
How so?
This man, who is a representative of imperialism, references Zimbabwe, references Venezuela, which are one of the most progressive governments in the world, but they are suffering today because of the America, which is the powerhouse of imperialism and continues to impose sanctions on these two nations. So white people, AfriForum, they have no agenda to change the lives of black people. This man has absolutely no faith in the government of this country. Why? Because he would have preferred it for this country to remain in apartheid, where we are ruled by the likes of Verwoerd and John Foster, who treat us as tenants in our own land.
Let's give him the response then. Let's give him the opportunity.
Anything progressive to say about land. We are going to take the land. This is our country. We are black people. They are unwanted visitors. I think they have even overstayed their time in this country.
Okay, let's give Adams an opportunity to respond. Your take, would you say you have no faith in this government currently in terms of the land restitution or land reform question?
Yes, we have no faith in the South African government in terms of the land reform
How would
question.
you contribute to perhaps restoring the dignity of black South Africa? As AfriForum, you're a civil rights organization. How would you contribute to correcting the problems that we're seeing across the country?
Well, the number one thing that we can do as a civil rights organization is firstly to campaign and to expose why the policies that our government is trying to put in place would not work, why we would be going down the road of Zimbabwe if we implement these policies.
So we don't just highlight the problems. First one is to highlight the problems, and what would be the solutions?
Then I think going forward, there would have to be a training-based, an input-based approach. So if government wants to do something, it should be based on training and education. And what AfriForum can do is encourage people who are farm owners. We're not an agricultural union, but we can encourage people to make sure that their workers go through proper training programs and so forth, as is appropriate in any business.
But they want to own the land. They want to be trained, yes, to work the land, but first thing, they want to own it. Or maybe we could run these two concurrently to say, we're training you to work the land. How do we go about having a program where those with ample amounts, hectares and hectares of land, can share this land?
But
is there such a program?
Own it. Not if the BLF gets their way, not if ANC gets its way. That's not what the policy is. The policy is for the state to own land. You can ask them, that's BLF policy, that black people should not own land. The state, the BLF and those people, they must be the government, and the government must own the land. And you can ask, there's been polls done. I think more than 80%, I think 90% of black people who've been trying to buy land in South Africa have said that they get no support from government. You can look at all these policies, all the laws that the ANC and these organizations want to put in place. They want it to be state land, not privately owned.
But can our fiscus handle it if we're constantly buying this land? Is that the way to go? Because, I mean, we had the Mala Game Reserve. I mean, that shocked a lot of people. It was a lot of money that was paid by government. So when we're talking, can the fiscus handle this? Because sometimes they say that the reason it's been so slow is because it costs a lot to be identifying land, and then we have to pay for it.
I think maybe the reason why we're talking past each other is because we don't fully agree on what the end goal is. So maybe, I mean, we definitely disagree, but maybe it's because we see the end goal as different, and therefore our proposed solutions are not the same. I don't think the end goal should be
land ownership.
Land ownership is fine. I think the end goal should be prosperity of people in South Africa, regardless of their black and white. That should be the end goal. If the end goal is black people must own land, white people shouldn't own land, then we can do what Mugabe did, and then everyone will be poor. I actually had it in my pocket this morning. I have a 20 trillion Zimbabwean dollar note, which I bought in Zimbabwe 2 months ago when I was there. That 20 trillion note is worth 40 cents. No, 10 cents. It's worth 10 cents. It's not even, you can't buy anything with that. If you have $20 trillion in Zimbabwe, that's why they scrapped the currency. And it's a direct result of simply taking people's land.
The end goal
because
of
the economy
the governing
crashes.
party is for black and white, Indian and coloured to all own land. Is that not the end goal?
No, I don't think that should be the end goal. The end goal should be everyone should be prosperous. The vast majority of people, white and black, have stated that they want to live in urban areas. You can see there's a massive urbanization, more so in the black community than in the white community. You can look at the figures. Stats SA has them. More black people are urbanizing at a much faster degree than white people. They want to live in the cities, the vast majority of them. So simply saying, no, black people want to own land, yes, in principle, maybe. I can't say yes or no, but based on what's happening is the vast majority of black people want to live in the cities.
We do know cases where some, in the case where they were offered land over money, they took the money. I mean, even Thabo Mbeki has talked about this, saying that it's important that perhaps black people would not be so enticed to take the money, but rather take the land.
Yeah.
But then, again, it comes back to perhaps maybe the education of knowing the value of land as well. When we talk the training, that if they knew the value of the land, then they would know that, let me rather not take the money. But again, when they take the money, it's because of the circumstances they find themselves in, to say, yes, I might take the land, but beyond that, how do I work it? I need further resources.
Yeah.
So I'd like to believe we're not talking past each other. I'd like to believe that according to the Constitution and the ANC, we all need to be prosperous, and we all, black and white, need to own some sort of land. But your take on some of the things that he's mentioning there?
Let me provide direction on what is the agenda of black people in South Africa today. Today, in 2017, the agenda of black people is radical economic transformation, which basically means that the means of production must belong to black people. Right now, we don't own anything as black people because of colonialism, because of slavery, because of neoliberal policies that continue to favor a white settler minority in this country. Now, radical economic transformation...
Who formulates policy?
Radical
do you
economic
believe
transformation...
The ANC, to a certain extent, when we're talking neoliberal policies, they are government. So if they're favoring the likes of capital, would it then be something that we put squarely on the lap of the governing party?
The president of the country now, President Zuma, is saying radical economic transformation, is saying land expropriation without compensation. As Black First, Land First, and many millions of black people in this country, they support that call. That's why we are going to put it in action and take back the land and give it to black people. In fact, it is white thinking to even look at land as something that can be privately owned or as a commodity. Black people respect land. Land is everything, and we are nothing without land.
But you don't want to give it to them.
That's why we live as secondary citizens in our own country. All of us, Black First, Land First, is the force in society today that's going to unite black people, and we are going to take back the land for the benefit of black people in this country.
Just last question for the both of you. Just last question. On the ANC's elective conference, what would you like them to resolve in terms of the land question? Just briefly, and then we'll go to Adams.
Yeah. One of the candidates, which is Umama Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who is very vocal on radical economic transformation, we support her fully as Black First, Land First. And we hope that in the elective Congress, she emerges so that the voices of our people can amplify and we take back the land in this country.
Adams, what would you like to see happening, or what would you like the ANC to resolve at the elective conference pertaining to land?
Well, I think land has become a political issue to an extent that it's not necessary. And I'd like to use the land claims numbers that you've given as an example. In South Africa, there's been, I think, about 200,000 land claims since 1994, since the Act opened, and the prediction is that there would be, I think, 400,000. If there are 400,000 land claims, it's still, and let's say all of them were instituted by black people, it would still be less than 1% of black people in South Africa who have instituted land claims. Now, within that 1%, 93% of them have said, we don't want land, we want money. We want the money. 7% said, yes, I'd like the land. 93% said no. But this is exactly the problem with the type of thinking that we have. So now we have the state president coming at the State of the Nation address saying, we are angry with you because you say you want money. We want you to want land. Don't say to us that you want money. Come back and say, no, you want land. So they are prescribing to black people how they should think. The vast majority of black people... So you should prescribe to black people how they should think.
Okay.
I have more respect for black people than you, it seems.
You don't.
Panel, thank you very much to the both of you for joining us. I hope we try to keep the peace, and that's where we leave it today. Thank you very much. Until next time.